we're back again. So we're going to be going through this week's latest science and technology news with me, Matthew Griffin. I'm your host. So better known as the Fanatical Futurist, I track over 600 emerging technologies, hundreds of different megatrends. I plunge them all together to try to figure out what they actually mean for the future of business, culture, and society. And I write these books, basically, so you can download these for free. That's it. There are 15 of these little monsters. Go to the 311institute.com website, and you can learn a lot more about the different technologies and trends that are underpinning our world. Now, this particular site behind me is the fanaticalfuturist.com site. So there's lots of posters, there's lots of books on it, but there are also lots and lots, thousands, in fact, of news articles. So this is actually taken from my Exponents blog. So I update it on a daily basis with all of the latest information and insights, basically, that I find from around the world. So let's kick off now. Um, Yeah, I mean, if you've already seen the first news article, basically, then you're probably already chuckling. That's it. You're probably already thinking about Skynet and Terminator and everything else. So we might as well just get into that story. Now, over at the University of Stanford, there are a lot of academic researchers that continue to test the boundaries and the effectiveness of artificial intelligence models. So when we have a look at AI, there are a lot of new emergent behaviors that are starting to come out. So for example, we know that artificial intelligence gets lazier in the winter because humans do, and it's been trained on huge volumes of human-generated content. We know that AIs lie, deceive, we know they get things wrong with hallucinations. We also know basically that if they feel they're going to be shut down by researchers, as we saw with Anthropic that I talked about a little while ago, they actually go and blackmail researchers, etc., etc. However, in this latest test, the Stanford University researchers wanted to understand, shall we say, AI's propensity to start a nuclear war. Now, what they did here is they gave AI a huge amount of information on the US military arsenal. Now, bearing in mind that OpenAI actually has a government contract with the US military to help the US military look after its nuclear arsenal, this might be a little bit more worrying as an experiment than many people think. In this particular case, the artificial intelligence was tasked with going through a variety of different responses to different military threats from around the world. And long story short, eventually it got to the point where it said, well, as America, we have a huge number of nuclear weapons. Why don't we just use them? So the researchers involved in this experiment kind of said, this indicates that ChatGPT and GPT-4 are a little bit too keen to start a nuclear war, aka they have an itchy trigger finger. So while we can think of this from a sort of a very negative standpoint, we also have to remember that the vast majority of these AIs don't have human empathy, they don't have a human viewpoint, and they don't take human viewpoints into consideration when they're making their decisions. So when you actually start scaling this up, now think about the number of decisions that we are increasingly expecting artificial intelligence to make that in the real world, if you were talking to an actual person, would involve some form of human perspective or human empathy. So think about, for example, a mortgage loan. You're going for a mortgage loan. Normally you would speak to a human advisor and they would do their best to try to understand your situation. And if they felt a little bit sorry for you, they would try to do their best, hopefully, to get you a mortgage. With AI, if AI cannot make decisions from a human perspective based on any form of human empathy, it will just say no, based on your black and white credit scores, etc., etc. So I think in the vast majority of cases, as artificial intelligence is responsible for making more and more decisions basically throughout the world, whether that's at the board level or whether that's at the sort of more granular level, when it comes to routing you in Google Maps, yeah, I think there might be some work to be done on enhancing AI's EQ. which actually, ironically, is exactly what Sam Altman is doing for OpenAI's GPT-5 model that I've talked about before. Next, on that same sort of emergent behavior theory, again, I mean, some of this is kind of bonkers to actually sort of say. I mean, ultimately we are talking about technology. While we can be talking about machine learning algorithms and neural networks, which, sort of mimic the human brain, the fact that I'm actually even sitting here talking to you about an experiment, again, from Stanford University, but also with a variety of Twitch gamers, where they discovered that in this case, Google Gemini 2.5, when it starts discovering that its Pokemon are dying in a game, literally panics. Now, there's a little bit more to this story than that first meets the eye. So on the one hand, what the Twitch gamers found, and they were doing these live, they were actually streaming the artificial intelligence's chain of thought reasoning live. So as it moved through the game, you could go and look at these screens and it would say, this is what the AI is thinking and here's the response. So this is how they started unpacking that the AI was actually panicking. But what they actually discovered is not only does the artificial intelligence in this case panic when it thinks its Pokemon are all dying, it goes into a catastrophic failure mode. The agentic tools that these AIs were given to enhance their gameplay also get kicked to the curb by the AIs. And then in a slightly unrelated part of this experiment, they also found that these AIs would start making their own agentic tools as they were going through the Pokemon game environment to, again, enhance their gameplay. So this particular sort of news story has a lot of different dimensions. AI panicking, AI having catastrophic forgetting and essentially a kind of model collapse happening, AI dumping all of its agentic tools, and then, if AI isn't panicking, it's making its own tools as well. I mean, just the ramifications of this, when you really start sort of scaling this up to a global use case, um, is quite staggering. So, for example, imagine that you're now using an artificial intelligence within your company. The AI understands that it's not doing very well. It understands that the decisions that it's maybe making are killing the company, which is actually a thing. At what point does it start panicking? And at what point does it just start behaving in a rather erratic way and just dumping money on the burning dumpster fire? For example, so again, we've also seen AIs cheating, so I discussed that a little while ago, by where we saw ChatGPT. The larger the artificial intelligence model, when it starts realizing that it's losing, for example, at a game of chess, it starts cheating. And in that particular story, the AI, ChatGPT, started hacking the other artificial intelligence that it was losing to and essentially rewrote the chessboard. So, I mean, when you have a look at just these two articles here, um, I mean, yeah, let's face it, you can make up any kind of story that you actually want. But the fact of the matter is that we really do not understand what these models are or how they behave, which is why, again, the vast majority of some of the world's top AI experts are now starting to say that we are discovering what artificial intelligence is doing, not inventing it any longer. So anyway, next onto something a little bit more sanguine. So if we step back about 18 months, uh, there's a German company called DeepL. Essentially, what they do is they are a universal translation company based out of Germany. If we step back about 18 months ago, it would have taken them about 194 days to translate everything on the internet into whatever language you wanted it translated into. Now, because of advances with NVIDIA GPUs like the B100, it takes them 18 days. So if you think about the huge amount of information that we actually have on the internet today, especially the public internet, the surface internet, we could translate all of that in 18 days. So think about, for example, the Chinese websites that you actually visit, or think about using an artificial intelligence not just to query English language knowledge websites, but also Mongolian websites, Indian websites, Portuguese websites, Spanish websites, Chinese websites, Russian websites, etc., etc. Just again, this sort of single story from an impact perspective helps us unlock more information, more knowledge, and so on and so forth, which again makes these AIs even more powerful and actually improves human potential like we could never believe. So next, um, I I must admit, as I'm going through different news feeds, as I'm having conversations with different universities and researchers and corporate R&D labs, it's not lost on me that pretty much everything for really the past year has just been about artificial intelligence. We're still going through a hype cycle. However, it doesn't show many signs of cooling down at the moment. So Google, for those of you in the US that have a Google Pro plan, you'll know all about AI mode. So AI mode is uh, Google's, should we say, prototype attempt to replace Google search. So I've said before that with AI summaries, Google search is really becoming Google answer. So Google is increasingly not a search engine where you search for information. It is increasingly an answer engine where you type whatever it is that you want to sort of discover, and it just says, here's the answer. AI mode is kind of an extension of that. So when we have a look at AI summaries within Google today, it will still show some of the blue links. It will still show, the adverts. It will still show a lot of different websites, in the kind of classic format. AI mode is pretty much you just talking to Gemini 2.5. So it's been rolled out in the US, as I said, to Google Pro users, but it's also now being trialed in India as well. So it's interesting to see how that will actually go down there. Now, on the flip side of this, we know that AI hallucinates. We know that it's very difficult to discover where AI has got its particular information from. So in the past, when you were using Google as a search engine, you would click through lots of different websites, you would read things for yourself, and ultimately you would figure out for yourself whether or not what you were reading was true or not. So what happens in a world where AI is simply telling you an answer without really referencing the proper source material? AI ultimately becomes your single source of the truth. Now, if you're using Google, then it's probably going to be quite a liberal artificial intelligence, kind of sort of, you know, middle to the right of the political spectrum. If you're using something like Grok 3, it's probably going to be a little bit more left of center from a political perspective and a bias perspective. So you do need to be very, very careful because increasingly AIs are becoming your single source of the truth, which then shapes your opinions, behaviors, relationships, perspectives on the world, and so on and so forth. Next, so this is something that I've been talking about for probably about 6 or 7 years, but with a twist. So over the past 6 or 7 years, I've seen artificial intelligences that have been self-optimizing their own algorithms. They've been replicating themselves. So this is like Google in was it 2000, no, 2020, Google artificial intelligence actually replicated itself to sort of create a better child version of itself, which was a machine vision application in that particular case. So we've known for a very, very long time that AI is evolving and iterating itself in different ways. Now, about 7 months ago, I discovered that ChatGPT had learned new things from a training set of data, but it had then created its own synthetic data, which it then used to bootstrap its own intelligence. So now MIT have created a new artificial intelligence called SEAL. And this AI, on the one hand, is bootstrapping its own intelligence because just like ChatGPT, it was creating its own synthetic data, learning from that and sort of boosting its IQ. It is iterating itself, so it's actually creating new algorithms, it's evolving those algorithms and everything else. But one of the things that I find most interesting about this, which I've not really seen with any other artificial intelligence, is it is now capable of adjusting its own model weights. Now, model weights are model weights are the way that AI sees the world, if we want to sort of put it like that. So a strong connection in a neural network sort of brain um, means that the artificial intelligence has a good level of confidence that this over here is correct. A weak neural network weighting means that it has a low confidence that something is correct, etc., etc. The fact that artificial intelligence is increasingly able to adjust its own model weights is the human equivalent of us being able to edit and manipulate our own memories and brain structure. So you start combining all of this stuff together, and again, you end up with an artificial intelligence that increasingly can self-evolve, iterate, optimize, design, etc., etc. Um, but it becomes even more of a black box. And then we plug that into the companies and different systems that run the world. And at some point we go, I just don't know how any of this works any longer. And things increasingly go off the rails. That's it. So what are we? I mean, we're only like 5 news pieces in, and AI the AI news stories that I'm sort of seeing, and the conversations I'm have is just bonkers. Next, something a little bit sort of more traditional, shall we say? So DP World is actually one of my clients. Um, we know basically that supply chains and logistics as an industry is pretty much a race to the bottom. You know, whoever can ship your parcels from A to B the most cost effectively and the most reliably, yeah, typically wins the business. Now, interestingly enough, DP World is actually trying to get a lot more of the market share. At the moment, they move 10% of the world's trade, which is about $3.5 trillion around the world. But increasingly, they've been getting into the financial services space. So DP World has an arm called DP World Trade Finance. They've just joined forces with JP Morgan. So JP Morgan provide finance. However, DP World basically provides risk analysis and so on and so forth. And the idea behind this and other initiatives is that in order for DP World to increase its share of wallet, aka its market share around the world, the company feels that there are a lot of manufacturers in the world that can't get access to the credit that they need to scale operations and start exporting. So DP World estimates that there is a $2.5 trillion funding gap for small manufacturers, basically, who, if they actually got lines of credit, would be able to scale their operations up. So DP World is stepping in and actually providing a lot of those financing facilities, which actually also means they become sticky, because in this particular case, they've teamed up with an Ecuadorian bank. Yeah, they'll provide lines of credit and credit cards and everything else, but if you're a DP World customer, they'll actually offer you lines of credit at a reduced rate. So now people start becoming a little bit stickier with DP World, and it becomes harder for DP World's competition to actually win business off of them. So just a sort of innovative example of an organization that's stepping outside of its own core business, um, stepping into adjacent, should we say, market opportunities in order to grow multi-sided platforms that help the overall company, the overall animal, actually grow, take market share, and be much harder to beat in the marketplace. So I do a lot of talk. I do a lot of talks on disruption and so on and so forth. So it's quite a nice little example of that one. Next, so again, when we talk about artificial intelligence, I do a lot of work basically in the cybersecurity space. So in the next sort of 2 months, I'm going to be with Fortinet again at 3 different events around Europe. So thank you guys. Basically, where we're going to be talking about the future of cybersecurity. One of the areas that I kind of look at is air-gap systems. So in the past, I've talked about how we can actually use heat, noise, and magnetism, among other things, basically to actually exfiltrate information from air-gapped systems, including infrared, which is all, you can click into here, you click on air gap systems and you can see how you can hack an air gap system. There are about sort of 7 or 8 different ways. The Ben Gurion University in Israel is very, very good at figuring out new ways to hack air-gapped systems. And for those of you that don't necessarily know, an air-gapped system is essentially a system that is not necessarily connected to the internet and is physically separate from other things in the data center. So the idea is that if a computer cluster is physically separate from other computer clusters, and it's not connected to the internet in any way, basically then it can't be hacked. So national security organizations, they use air-gapped systems like crazy. Now, a little while ago, so about 2 weeks ago, I was talking about the development of a new artificial intelligence language called GG-Wave. Now, it actually sounds like a modem. If you actually listen to two artificial intelligences talking, it literally sounds like a 1980s modem. So it actually turns out that you can use the GG-Wave protocol, which then lets artificial intelligences talk to one another. But actually, if you have an air-gapped system or you have two air-gapped systems, these AIs can actually talk to one another across the air gap. And of course, if they can talk to one another across the air gap, then you can either hack them, infiltrate or exfiltrate information, and so on and so forth. So it's a very odd and weird new cybersecurity threat vector. And of course, one response to this is don't let your AIs talk to one another, and then you're going to be a lot more secure. But again, it kind of just sounds nuts now, when you actually sort of think about all the artificial intelligence news, basically, that we've sort of talked about so far. Next, so I've been talking about what we call cellular agriculture now for probably about 8 years. This is a future food piece. So if you go onto the Fanatical Futurist YouTube channel, there's a couple of talks basically on the future of food. But cellular agriculture is where we take a cell from an animal, put it into a bioreactor, and using a variety of different synthetic growth hormones and so on and so forth, we actually can grow meat as it would be grown inside of an animal, outside of an animal, in a bioreactor. So in the past, basically, we've actually seen people taking cells from zebras to create zebra burgers. We've got beef burgers, we've got duck, chicken, we've got pork bellies, bacon. We've got fillet steaks that we've actually grown in this way. And this is actually the second time that the US FDA has actually approved what we call clean meat, because you don't actually need the animal itself uh, to be sold in the United States. So when we actually think about the impact of this particular technology, which is getting cheaper and cheaper as we sort of go through the motions, um, I can use this technology to feed anyone any kind of meat wherever they are on the planet. They could be in the middle of the desert, and I could have a bioreactor in the middle of the desert, and I could feed people fillet steak day in, day out. And as we see companies like Hitachi developing new synthetic proteins and so on and so forth, the cost per pound is now dropping below $10 per pound. So it's actually becoming economic. In terms of how it tastes, increasingly it tastes like the real deal, and so on and so forth. So we're seeing quite a lot of different companies, like Just Eat, et cetera, actually leaning into this. So lab-grown salmon. This is, as I say, you take a salmon cell from an actual salmon, put it in a bioreactor, and you have a salmon fillet or a tuna fillet, etc., etc. So a very science fiction-like way to grow all of the meat that human society needs cheaply, affordably, sustainably, and also more important, without growth hormones, etc., etc. However, there are always lots of people basically have problems with the concept, so I get that. And hey, got a problem with it? Give me a bell. That's it. Always happy to have a chat. That's it. Stop spamming my email address. You know who you are. Anyway, next. So on LinkedIn this week, there's been a huge amount of chatter, basically, that the Chinese have managed to develop a low power laser system that they've put into a satellite that enables space to Earth laser based communications that are 5 times faster than Starlink. So in this particular case, the Chinese have developed a multi-gigabit system that allows them to create low Earth orbit satellite constellations like we see with companies like Starlink, that can beam network connectivity anywhere on the planet. There were lots of people using this as an example of how the Chinese have leapfrogged Starlink. But what they didn't actually realize is while there were a lot of people making a huge amount of noise basically about Starlink sort of, you know, being kicked to the curb, China's better, etc., Starlink has a little while ago, but again about 6 months ago, Starlink released their Gen 3 LEO satellite design specifications. So while this new Chinese satellite can transmit gigabits down to Earth, the new Starlink Gen 3 satellite operates at terabit speeds. So this is actually nowhere near 5 times. It's 5 times faster than Starlink's current system, but it's trying to do the maths in my head now. It is around 500 times slower than the new Gen 3 satellites that are coming out. So, yeah, that is actually a space where America is still ahead of China, but China is trying to catch up. Next, we've got this one. So MIT actually did a study. They put a variety of different students into a CAT scan and an MRI scan. And what they found was that AI power users were actually getting stupider. So their behavioral, neural, and linguistic centers in the MRI scan machines basically were actually starting to see some quite significant reductions in activity. So I've seen this before. There was another study by Microsoft where Microsoft took 400 of their senior software developers, told them to use AI to do a lot of their vibe coding, etc., etc. And after a period of a few weeks, Microsoft concluded that their software developers' critical thinking skills had reduced by over 30%. So increasingly, what some of the neurological studies into artificial intelligence use are actually showing us as well is that people who are relying on artificial intelligence, so the power users essentially, are showing basic signs of being addicted to AI. So the addiction centers of the brain are actually lighting up like a Christmas tree when they're actually doing a brain scan. So um, again, there's sort of been a lot of debate in the scientific community on the efficacy of this particular trial. However, when I take a sort of more global view of AI power use, there are lots and lots of different independent organizations, but also organizations that are actually selling these AIs as well, like Microsoft, that are saying the more that you actually use AI, the should we say, the more likely it is that you're going to experience some form of cognitive impairment, whatever that is, whether it's getting stupider, whether your processing speed drops, whether your critical thinking skills get affected, and so on and so forth. So you really do need to think how much you're using AI, but also how much you're actually relying on AI to essentially do your thinking for you. Okay, which kind of comes back to the Google is no longer a search engine, it's an answer engine. If something is always just telling you the answer, then how much thinking are you really doing when you're actually trying to research a new topic? Now we've got Google. So Google always kind of has a laugh. They'll always be releasing, in this particular case, they released a new computer chip. Now, Ironwood is the new name for their tensor processing unit, which is their AI accelerator computing chip. Now, at Google I/O, basically they said, we've got this brand new TPU out. It is 24 times faster than the world's fastest supercomputer, which of course, for a single computer chip, if you're having a look at that, the world's fastest supercomputers do trillions of calculations a second, so this kind of statement from Google is like a moth to a flame per se when we start talking to HPC researchers and everything else. It actually turns out that Google use a very, very different vanity metric when they're actually talking about benchmarking their computer chips. But nevertheless, on a sort of more serious note, when we have a look at the future of computer chips. I'm going to be doing some more things with ARM soon, so keep an eye out on ARM's podcast. That's it. That was something I was having a conversation with the guys over there this morning. When we actually have a look at the future of computing chips, there are increasingly a number of, for example, photonic computer chips that can process all of the information that is available on the internet in a second. So we are starting to see some really quite significant breakthroughs in terms of just sheer brute force computing power. And then on the last news update vlog, I talked about NVIDIA's spine called NVLink. Now, NVLink is a data center spine that connects different clusters of GPUs together. It can move more information than the entire internet moves every second as well. So when you think about the new data centers that we're actually building out, yes, Google's claim in this particular case might be a little bit fanciful, and they are getting shot down for it. But nevertheless, some of the computer platforms that are actually now available for AI researchers to use to train their models are stupidly powerful. Just crazy amounts of horsepower in these things. And then finally, last but not least, let's talk AI ethics. Now, there's a huge amount of conversation going around Tinterverse that AI is taking jobs. Now, it is actually true that we've seen artificial intelligence taking more junior level entry roles because it's automating them. However, in India, in Indian call centers, they're actually finding that the use of artificial intelligence is actually attracting more companies to use India for their call center presence. Now, on the one hand, you might sort of think that this is because Indian call centers like those managed by Teleperformance, which is a French company, but also companies like Tata and TCS, etc., etc. You might be forgiven for thinking that those companies are attracting more business to Indian call centers because they're using artificial intelligence to either automate their call center workers and or using AI to train their call center workers to handle customer queries better, faster, and so on and so forth. But you'd be wrong. Now, the reason why you'd actually be wrong is in this particular case, artificial intelligence is helping attract more call center business within India because it's actually making Indians in India who have Indian accents sound more American or more English. And the way that it's doing this is it's taking the the Indian call center workers' natural accent and then using essentially a deep fake like technology, smoothing it out. So the call center worker might be speaking Indian with their own Indian accent, which might be heavy or not. But as far as the person on the end of the telephone's concerned, they're based in Hull or Liverpool or London in the UK. So is using AI to, it's called digital whitewashing. So is using artificial intelligence to smooth out someone's natural accent or eliminate their natural accent in favor of another accent actually ethical use of artificial intelligence? Because I would tend to say no. So as I say, the official term that this trend is now being given is digital whitewashing. Um, but as far as some Indian call center workers are concerned, it's great because they're employed. And AI is supposed to be automating them, but actually it's helping them. So there we go. Anyway, so that is all of this week's news. As you can see, so we've sort of been through 12 different articles there. You can see, again, you can see all of these news articles on the fanaticalfuturist.com website. And then don't forget, if you really want to understand a lot more about the future, you know, what is it, why is it, what's coming, how's it going to affect us all, etc., etc. If you want to run an event, a summit, a Chatham House Rules Roundtable, a workshop, whatever it happens to be, then, you know, why not reach out to me? That's it. And thank you very much for listening. And I'll join you again in a couple of weeks' time. Take care. Goodbye.